Welcome to my garage, my workshop to record this today. What we're going to do, this is the first of several videos that we're going to go through talking about the arrest and trials that Jesus went through leading up to what would become Resurrection Sunday. So this is the end of the Passion Week, and he's going to be arrested and go through all that kind of stuff. Most people tend to not know this, is sort of why we're going to go through this. How many trials did Jesus actually go through? And most people don't get it right. But the answer is 6. He went through 6 separate, distinct trials on his during his being accused and then ultimately being sentenced to death by crucifixion from Pilate. So we're going to talk about all that. We're going to see the historical things that were going on. We're going to try to get into the imagination of it all and find out what happened and how it happened and what things looked like and what they felt like. If you want to grab your Bible, we're going to be in John chapter 18. We're not going to go quite verse by verse. We're going to go actually a little deeper than that and get to the insides of all this stuff. And I think we're gonna learn some interesting things. One thing to keep in mind throughout all of this is acknowledging that Jesus is while he's a man and he's going to endure some pretty serious stuff, he is still omniscient. He knows the entire law, literally. He knows everything that the Pharisees knew or were ever taught. He knows their hearts. He knows their thoughts. He knows their motivations. And that's a pretty interesting thing when you think about if you've ever been wrongly accused and you know in your heart of hearts that you are right, that you're innocent, that it's not your fault, that whatever. When you are wrongly accused, you will pretty well fight to the death to clear your name, to fight for righteous indignation, whatever you want to call it, and Jesus is going to be right there in that realm, and he's going to put up with it. And I guess my point is, when you think about all that Jesus dealt with, all that he endured in the scourging and then the actual crucifixion, that was painful. You've I'm sure heard the different things about how it was such an effective form of capital punishment and all that. And I guess I would argue that what Jesus dealt with mentally prior to the physical pain of the cross was at least as bad, if not worse. I know if I were to be wrongly defamed or I were to be hit in the face, I would choose being hit in the face because that's relatively temporal. I know that's not what Jesus dealt with on the cross, but I'm just saying what he dealt with in the mental side would be a pretty big deal, as we're going to find out. So throughout all this, keep that in the back of your mind. If you want to let your imagination go into effect here, Jesus knows the thoughts, hearts, and rules of everything and everybody going on here. That's a pretty unique aspect. So the Pharisees, they want to put Jesus on trial, and they want to arrest him. So in order to arrest him, they have to they need the cooperation of Judas, and they need the location of Jesus. And if it's like, well, why didn't they just go send somebody to arrest him? They didn't have like the wanted posters in the post office. You can't just tell the Roman soldiers, go arrest this guy. They're like, which one is he? Yeah, without photography, without everybody, they all have beards. They're all dressed in relatively the same kind of clothes. It's they needed someone to identify him, and that's where Judas comes in. Also, they needed the location of Jesus. Jesus, up to this point, was pretty good. If he needed to slip away, You find that throughout the times when he's teaching, he's able to slip away. When there's several places in the Gospels where he's able to elude them. You see those kinds of words to sort of escape. So the Pharisees, the people in charge, the people that want Jesus arrested, they need cooperation from Judas, and they need Jesus's location. So Judas agrees, and you know how Satan had been working in his heart, and Judas agrees for 30 pieces of silver to betray Christ. 30 pieces of silver, that was the cost of a common slave. Not a small amount of money, but the cost of a common slave. It would have been a very cheap price. Interestingly though, since we know the future of what's going to happen, Judas really didn't. He didn't sell Jesus. He really sold himself, because he actually lost in the end, ultimately. So we're in John chapter 18, verse 1. Jesus is in the garden, and he prays to the Father that he would not have to go through with the suffering and crucifixion, but, however, he wanted the Father's will above all. He's assured that it's the Father's will that he go to the cross, and he cooperates with that. There's full agreement in that. So here's the thing. This happened at night. I know you know that, but this happened at night. There would be no crowds Jerusalem is full of people in Jerusalem because of Passover. Tons of people are there, but at night it wouldn't be crowded. Jesus would be easy to detect if he ran. They expected a running. They expected to have to capture him in some way. And that's why this band of men coming, says in verse 3, chapter 18, verse 3, Judas, then having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. This is a big deal. If you can imagine this, with no cars, no sirens, no fire trucks or ambulances, none of that kind of noise. And here comes a band of men. This would be anywhere from 600 to 1,000 men marching with torches, with lanterns, and with weapons. Think of the thunderous marching through the streets. Think of all their armor clanging together as their shield slaps their arm, and their at least 600, could have been up to 1,000 men. This was a big deal. This was if you saw this coming down the street, you would go hide. You would get out of there very quickly. In verse 12. Just jumping way ahead. So the Roman cohort and the commander of the officers of the Jews, excuse me, the word captain there in the Greek, it means leader of 1,000 soldiers. Maybe he had a full 1,000, maybe he had 900, maybe he had 600, whatever. But there could have been 1,000 soldiers that night. They came prepared for a fight. They were expecting, they are told, this is a bad guy, you got to go. They don't know who Jesus is. It's the Jews that are conscientious of who this Jesus is, or is claiming to be, at least they thought. And he's apparently a bad guy, and the Romans, they go big. And so they come prepared for a fight. Jesus didn't run. This is interesting. Can you imagine seeing that group coming down the street and then walking up to them and stopping them, approaching them? You wouldn't do that because they're not necessarily going to stop at all. They would just trample you right over if they don't know who you are or whatever. It says, so Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, whom do you seek? He just steps right up to the place, and walks right up to him and stops. And I imagine this this parade of soldiers coming down, and all of a sudden that final step, because they're marching, and that final step, and there's Jesus. And whom do you seek? They answered him, Jesus the Nazarene. And so he says to them, I am he. And Judas, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, I am he, these are Roman soldiers, best of the best, elite, Delta Force, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, whatever you want. This is a big deal. When he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Can you imagine knocking down that? Think of the noise of that. That would be a big deal. Therefore he said again to them, therefore he again asked them, whom do you speak? And they said, Jesus the Nazarene. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way. Talking about his disciples, the group that had obviously they were sleepy. They would have woken up when they hear the Romans coming. So Jesus goes forth to meet him. They didn't expect that. They didn't think it was him. Jesus, in this moment, I told you I'm he. So if you seek me, let these go their way. He knows what's about to happen, and he is filled with compassion. And his attitude is, let these go their way. He's thinking of others. Pretty interesting. We would be concerned with our own self. If you're about to be arrested, you're just thinking of saving your own skin, and all he's thinking about is the other people. And then it says in verse 9, to fulfill the word which he spoke, of those whom you have given me, I lost not one. So he wants his disciples to go away so that they're not lost here. And then here's Peter, typical Peter. Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. And the slave's name was Malchus. So it's not funny at all, but it's just kind of interesting. Peter here, he sees these Romans. Why didn't he attack one of the Romans? They're the ones actually doing the work. Why did he pick on the relative weakling in the group, this simple high priest slave? He doesn't go after the big dogs that actually had the authority to do something. He attacks somebody a little weaker. That's just kind of funny. And what does Jesus do? He turns to compassion, and so Jesus said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" And we know from the other Gospels that he turns and instantly heals the servant. That's in Luke 22:51. So they come forward and they arrest Jesus. This has gone on far enough. This is whatever is going on in this. The Romans say, "All right, enough's enough. We have a job to do. We're here to do it. Let's get this done." So here's how they would do this. The proper manner. This is from Jim Bishop, The Day Christ Died. It says this: the proper manner taught by the Academy of Soldiering in Rome was to take the accused by the right wrist, twist his arm behind him so that his knuckles touched between his shoulder blades. At the same time, jam the heel of the boot down on the right instep. and tied the other arm with a loose noose around the neck. So not so different than the way if a police officer needs to really get a hold of somebody, get that arm behind their back and then lift up, and it's not fun. I can't get my arm even half there. I can't physically do it. If somebody did, it would hurt an awful lot. And that's the way Jesus is transported. In fact, he's transported like this for quite a while. And with the way that he's tied, it's somewhat equivalent to like a choker chain for a dog. The more they pull, the more it's going to hurt. So this makes it so it's a very calm walk. You don't have to have the reins tight as you're pulling the arrested person along, because if they make it tight, they're going to be in a world of hurt really quick. At this point, Jesus is alone. He is deserted by his disciples. From this point on, he is not free. He is a property of the state. He was not the Son of God to them. He was a rebel rouser. He was a fake. And this is the first experience Jesus had with physical pain. From now on, all the blows Jesus took, his hands were behind his back. The trial starts at verse 13. But let's look, before we get there, we're going to look at the historical background. So the Jews are in this land of Israel. It was ruled by the Roman Empire. The Romans were ruled by a god on earth, Caesar, and he was regarded as a god. Tiberius was the Caesar at this time. Tiberius ruled with an iron fist. He was a sadistic, anti-Semitic Gentile, as was Pilate. It had been passed down from Rome that Israel would never carry a prisoner to capital punishment. The Jews could not take a life. If they could have, they would have stoned Jesus. If Jesus had happened prior to being an occupied territory, they would have just stoned him, because they would have been allowed to, based on what they're going to accuse him of, which, spoiler, is going to be blasphemy, at first at least, and they were allowed to stone somebody for that. But now they're an occupied country, and Rome doesn't allow them to enact capital punishment. They have to do any of that. They would have stoned Jesus because that was a method of killing, but since they were under Roman authority, they must crucify him. That was the Roman method of capital punishment. So ultimately, so they could try a man and bring him only so far, namely to their council called the Sanhedrin. Let's just say it's not, but for right now, it's like the Supreme Court. A body of 70 to 73 men. That's the greater Sanhedrin. The lesser Sanhedrin had 23 men, but they could not pass judgment on capital crimes. So, before the full body of men, this man must stand. Once they come to an accusation, they must carry that to the Roman authority, who happened to be Pilate. When he says thumbs down, then and only then can death occur. And that's why Jesus was crucified for treason rather than stoned for blasphemy. And we'll get into that, the change there, when we get to the later trials. So we'll get in. We're probably gonna. We're getting kind of long-winded here. Let's talk about before we get into all of the trials. Here's just a couple. This is background info. The laws governing criminal trials. If a man was arrested for a crime, a capital crime, he could never be arrested at night. Don't ask me why. It was just their rules. But this is laws that were established in place. He could never be arrested at night. It had to be in broad daylight. Jesus' arrest took place between 1 and 2 o'clock at night. We're going to go through real specifically the timeline as we go through all this. Number 2, if a man was arrested for a capital crime, no one cooperating in the arrest could be in any way connected to the one who is accused. No arrest for a capital crime could be made based upon information given by a follower or colleague of the accused, because if they felt the accused was guilty, so were his followers. So if Jesus is guilty of something, Judas is guilty of the same things. He's a follower. But the entire plot revolved around Judas, one of the followers. This law was blatantly and openly ignored. Number 3, no Jewish trial could ever be held at night. The law stated that it must be held in the daytime. Listen to the code, which is taken from the Talmud. The members of the court may not alertly and intelligently hear the testimony against the accused during the hours of darkness. But if you check the record, both before Annas and before Caiaphas, these trials were held in darkness. Here's an interesting thing. Number 4, the members of the Jewish court, after hearing the testimony of true witnesses in a capital crime, could not immediately act and judge. So after the testimony is given, you could think of it as the jury or whatever, the people that are making this decision. They could not immediately act and judge. They were to go home, remain alone and separate from one another for 2 days, or at the least 1 full day, thinking about the testimonies they had heard. During that time, here's what they were to do. Here's the language of the code. Eat like food, drink like wines, sleep well, and once again return and hear the testimony of the accused. So they would hear the entire accusation a second time. They've heard it, thought about it separately, and then go back. They hear it a second time. Then and only then shall you render a vote. They didn't do that. The Jewish court never left the presence of Caiaphas. In fact, even the method of voting was specified when they would go through and vote. They never took an all in favor say aye, all opposed say no kind of vote. Their vote was to be taken from the youngest to the oldest. So of all the people there in the court, the youngest person would vote first and then up to the oldest, so that the youngest wouldn't be intimidated or influenced by the older votes. This also never happened. No trial could be held before only one judge, and never without a defense attorney. All of that was overlooked, openly, willfully ignored, and disobeyed. Even though they were people of the book, they didn't follow their own rules. In the history, this is just a phrase here, in the history of jurisprudence, I don't know of a more fallacious series of trials. We're gonna take a break here. There'll be more next time, and we're gonna start with the first trial. But that gives us a little bit of a heads up into what this is all going to be about. I hope you enjoy this. It's exciting for me to teach. I love learning. I love learning it, and I love teaching this stuff. So we will see you next time. Thanks.